Okay, thank you all. I just have a few words I want to say before we get started. And I also want to thank especially our speakers who are coming from Washington State and Miami, although our Miami speaker missed his plane, so he'll be a little late, and people from Washington, D.C. So we're really fortunate to have so many really illustrious people, I think, here. So, for those of you who don't know, which I think is, I hope no one, but what we're here to do is to see or to explore, or to talk about what works in batterers intervention. And that's a totally legitimate question. There's nobody here who isn't interested in doing those things that are going to be more effective. I'm sure of that. But of course, domestic violence is a really big and complex issue, and so it's hard to sort out all of that. Some of you probably heard of something called perspective taking, right? Which is where you assume a kind of vantage point. And, you know, if we were to do that and we were to look down, what we would see, we'd see a lot of good things, right? But if we were to look down on the earth, we'd also see war and genocide, ethnocide, we'd see mass shootings, we'd see snipers picking people off on Florida highways, we'd see movie theaters and schools, and violence in our homes. We would see all of that. And if we were to go back in time, since like the beginning, we'd see something similar, minus the weapons, I would say. So violence is, so far as I know, no one has ever found a way to stop it, or maybe no one has ever found a reason to stop it, but it's been going on since the beginning of time, and batterers intervention is 40 years old. Something like that. So for 30, 40 years, I could be off a little, we've been thinking about how to end violence of domestic violence offenders. That contrasted with, since the beginning of time, all kinds of violence occurring every place. So if any of you who are in this room who've done work with batterers have done anything at all to reduce violence in even one person, you've done something remarkable that nobody else has been able to figure out how to do since forever. And you probably deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for that. I know you probably all don't get thanked enough, but so I would like to officially do that. About 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting here in New Mexico of programs who provide domestic violence services, including batterers intervention. The point was to figure out what we were going to do in the future here. So what are domestic violence services going to look like 10 years from now? We're going to be meeting for a couple of years, but an example that was used by me, and that I'm going to use again, so I apologize if you've all heard this before, comes from a movie that was shot here in New Mexico in Ghost Ranch, actually, which is, you know, north of Santa Fe, Abiquiu area, for those of you who don't know where it is. And that film was called City Slickers. And in City Slickers, the star is Billy Crystal, and Billy Crystal and his friends are having a midlife crisis, and they decide that what they really want to do is figure out the meaning of life. Like, what is their purpose? So they come out west, and while they're there, to a dude ranch, and while they're there, they meet this inaptly named character, played by Jack Palance. They call him Curly, and he's this big, imposing trail boss. And he says to Billy Crystal and his friends, "Do you want to know what the meaning is of life?" And they're like, "Yeah, I mean, obviously that's why we're here, right? It's going to be supplied to us quickly, and that's why we came, and that's great." And Curly says, "The meaning of life is one thing." And they say, "What?" They're excited to hear. And Curly says, "That's what you have to find out." So as I was thinking about that, it occurred to me that over the last 40 years, there have been a number of people in the domestic violence movement, or more specifically in batterers intervention, who have devoted their careers, and in some cases their lives, to that one thing, to figuring out why people are violent and what we can do to stop it. So as we think about what's next, we can learn, I think, from what they have already accomplished. And for those people who've been in the field for 40 years, we can learn from people who are just entering about what could be next. So that's the first one thing. The second one thing, sounds like Dr. Seuss, one thing, two thing, is that there is no one thing, undoubtedly, that causes violence. There are probably multiple causes, multiple approaches, and multiple right answers. I think the truth is that some things work for some people in some places at some times. I think that we can say with some certainty. And by the way, before I forget, I do want to mention that victims say overwhelmingly that they want batterers intervention to exist. So that's something that they count on and hope for. I was in California a couple weeks ago at a conference, and I attended a poster session. And one of the people that was there was a woman from a foundation, I can't remember the name, I'm sorry, in New York City, and their purpose was to look at honor killings and to help domestic violence advocates understand the differences in those experiences. And I thought that was really an interesting sort of endeavor. And so it occurred to me, you know, what if, well, first, an honor killing, as we know, is where someone is, usually a male, has been disrespected by a female relative. And so the response, the called for response, the acceptable response, is to avenge one's honor and to kill the person who has caused that disrespect. That's sort of the definition of an honor killing, and we all know that that goes on in various places. But let's say we were going to send Stan there. Stan, we want you to work with these people and try to figure out how we can stop or reduce these honor killings. The question is, what would you focus on? Would it be substance abuse? Might be. Are they psychopaths? Some of them, probably. Did some of them have mental illness? They could. Do they have communication or social skills deficits? Likely. Anger problems? Are they privileged and entitled? Do they live in a culture that calls for or enables that kind of response? It could be all, some, or none, right? So when we're talking about domestic violence, the question is, what do we really mean? To my knowledge, there has not been any consensus on what it is that are the root causes of violence. And it may be that we don't care about that. In lots of change strategies, the idea of a root cause is less important, right? We might tweak the environment or do various other kinds of interventions, and we can leave the root cause unaddressed. And that might well be the case here, but I think it's important that we recognize that we have not come to any agreement about the root cause, all the while we debate various approaches. So when we leave here, I hope we leave with three things. The first is that violence has been going on forever, since the beginning of time. Batterers intervention has been going on for 30 or 40 years, right? We're still babies. We're in our infancy. The second thing is that I hope we can both we can listen and hear from people who've been doing this for lots of years, as well as be enthusiastic about hearing from people who are just starting and who have something to offer. The third thing is that there are multiple right answers. I hope we don't leave here thinking this is the one answer and everybody else is wrong. I think there can be multiple right ways. And then last, sometimes we talk about just sort of getting rid of batterers intervention altogether. And so I hope that we don't throw it out, because if we do that, we kind of surrender to the inevitability of violence. And if we do that, we'll never, ever know what causes it or what to do about it.